I'm a volunteer at our local prison, and as part of that, every year I do these online in-services about different topics that you need to know as a person who's staff. Volunteers are part of the staff. And so every year I do this suicide prevention training, and I've been thinking about it because I remember when I first did this last year was the first time I had to do this. I was really struck by the numbers, and then I redid the course this week. And again, really struck by these numbers, and so I wanted to share some of this with you, mostly, I think, because from the time I was in high school, I've been around people who have either attempted or committed suicide. Both. A kid I knew in high school committed suicide, and a friend of mine attempted or was being suicidal, and it's just been something that's every decade has been part of my life. And I don't find myself very fearful of it. In fact, I think the reason I wanted to give this talk is because maybe 3 weeks ago I read about a man in Australia who lives near a bridge, and people commit suicide from this bridge. And so over the years, he just goes out and talks with them. And at first he used to kind of try to drag them away. And then he just started just going and talking to him. And he's done this for years and years. And some people have gone ahead and decided to end their life, and 165 people decided not to. So this one man had saved all those people's lives. And I just thought that was amazing. And then yesterday, a little 13-year-old girl in Tacoma committed suicide jumping off one of those freeway overpasses. It was very sad. And so I was just thinking, there's, it's in our lives, I guess is the thing. And so we can educate ourselves about this, and there's things that you can learn to recognize, which you would want to be, do some training in. I'm not going to try to do that. I've typed them out for myself, but I'm not really the one to present this. I think that maybe somebody else more skilled. But I did want to just present some of the myths and some of the facts, because I found those really, really, striking to me. The CDC, the Center for Disease Control, says that suicide is the 11th leading cause of death in the U.S. But for inmates, it's the first. And that, I was, I was kind of shocked by it, but it kind of makes sense too. And then, so because this is something that anyone from all walks of life might be exposed to, or you'll know, I think it's good to go through these myths and facts, because it can help us to be more skillful, which is a very Buddhist thing to do, right? So most people who commit suicide have made previous threats, and 8 out of 10 people who commit suicide give definite warning signs. But the people who commit suicide actually have mixed feelings about killing themselves. They want their life to be better or different often, and they don't necessarily wish to die, but that just seems like the best option to end the suffering, I think. And 80% of people who kill themselves have made one prior attempt. And then in the incarcerated population, suicides happen 3.5 times more than in the general population. So, and also one thing for us who work and write letters to inmates, I think it's good to train ourselves in this so we can, or if we go into the prisons and stuff. And one thing I was surprised, but maybe not surprised to hear, is that recently released offenders are at a much greater risk for the first 28 days that they're out. And you can see why. I mean, I just read in the paper about, or in the news about these 2 men who were deemed to be innocent of a crime in North Carolina. And after 30 years, they let them out with $45. What do you? They don't. They happen to have family and friends, but in the training that we do, the scenario is, and this happens, somebody's in for 30 years. They've been in since a young age, with very little warning. Sometimes they're let out with very little money, and they know no one. And we know from those of us who write to inmates, some of the inmates we write to have no relatives, no friends, no contacts on the outside, and they've been in prison for decades. So, just having this awareness. Most people who are suicidal want to be rescued, and you can't make someone suicidal by discussing the issue with them. And they say that it's actually good to, in fact, talk openly. It shows the person that you care. And so they say an appropriate question is, are you thinking about hurting yourself? And then the other thing I wanted to just address here is the part about mental illness, because I found this part kind of sobering, really. So a person who commits suicide definitely isn't necessarily mentally ill. I've known maybe half a dozen people, and none of the ones I know who committed suicide were mentally ill. Are they depressed, though? And that's not always the case. Some people are, some aren't. In fact, sometimes when a person who is depressed, when it lessens, they actually have more energy, and that's sometimes when they've kind of made their decision and they have more energy, and that's when they kill themselves. So, but in terms of the people who have mental illnesses, it was surprising to me that people who have schizophrenia, which in our prisons is like between about 2.5% to 4% of the inmates in state prisons have schizophrenia, which is a psychotic disorder. That's the leading cause of death for anyone with schizophrenia. And 40% of people who have schizophrenia will attempt suicide at least once, and it's much higher for males. It's more like 60%. So that's quite sobering. That's the highest. And then the bottom line there was that 10 to 15% of people with schizophrenia have historically committed suicide. It's huge numbers. And then with depression, now these numbers are just about really in the state prisons, but they say that 13 to 18, or almost 19% of inmates have major depression. And one of the clinical symptoms of major depression is recurring thoughts of killing yourself. And that I've known from a person that I knew who, had that, and then finally got over the stigma of taking antidepressants, and it really leveled it out, and that just completely disappeared. So that sounded quite familiar. So, I think that just having an awareness of these numbers is kind of sobering, but I think more my point is remembering that man who was able to help people. And just, I think in order for us to be in a situation where we can do that, we have to kind of let go of a certain fear and educate ourselves. And I think that's a very skillful and loving thing to do, just to have some kind of awareness of this, because you don't know. I mean, I've had coworkers who have had major problems with suicidal thoughts. Really nice man I used to work with. And family, although mostly I've learned after the fact, didn't really know things were going on. And so we have a role in terms of being able to be there for people. Maybe it's just to direct them to, someone who can actually help them. And there are people who can. A friend of mine was a social worker for many years, and in Oregon, and in her county, she had the responsibility to actually incarcerate people against their will if they were suicidal. So sometimes that's something that is done so the person can get through this phase to be observed and helped, so that they don't, that there's an intervention before they kill themselves. And so that's something that is set up in our state systems. Actually, the county mental health systems is who she worked for. So just having an awareness of resources, our own abilities, I think that's worth thinking about.